And if we can talk first about the joint ownership for non-married borrowers. This actually came up last week. I had a buyer come to me on Tuesday, referred to me from a real estate agent. He was a first-time home buyer, and they really can't always afford the property on their own that they're really looking for. And so this person had the idea to add a friend. He didn't have a co-signer. He didn't have a parent or relative that could co-sign or co-borrow with him. And so he decided to find a friend that wanted to also buy a home, and they decided together to go in and potentially purchase a home. I imagine this brings up some legal challenges if, God forbid, they ever want to split ways later and don't like each other later if they're not friends anymore.
Great topic. So I think you're seeing this more and more over the years. 20, 30 years ago, you almost only saw married couples buying property. But I think people are not running to the altar, but they're in a committed relationship and they sometimes want to buy real estate together. The issue is, if there is a separation, if there's a breakdown in the relationship, unlike a married couple where you can go to divorce court and figure things out, you can't do that as two unmarried co-owners of a piece of property.
Right.
The only avenue you have is to go through a land court process, which is known as a petition to partition, which runs about a year to 2 years and probably would cost somewhere around $50,000.
Holy cow. Okay.
So not a pleasant process.
No.
So, there is, for lack of a better word, an agreement we can put together. It's really almost like a prenuptial agreement, but for couples that aren't going to be married but that are buying properties.
Interesting.
I call it an operating agreement. It's a very simple, 2-3 page document that would cover those what ifs that you sort of raised. Hey, what if this doesn't work out and one of us wants out of this situation?
Wow. So this is only if they're potentially disagreeing with each other in the future and they don't agree on selling the home or, just parting ways and splitting things easily. And very often I bet that can happen where they're not agreeing on something. Is that right?
Yeah. So it's like anything. It's if while things are going well, like let's say you and I want to go into business together, we're going to start a new business.
Right.
That's the time to do some type of agreement that talks about, all right, everything's going great, but what if?
Yeah.
Because we can reach those agreements when we're happy and enthusiastic and we're looking positive on the situation. Once things break down, it's sometimes near impossible to reach agreement.
Yeah.
So, if we put together something up front, we can not only cover those what ifs down the road, but we can also document how things are going to happen in the short term.
Okay.
We're going to apply for a mortgage with Tony.
Yeah.
We're both going to be on the hook for this mortgage. How are we going to pay for it? Who's going to be responsible for the monthly payments? What proportion are we going to make those monthly payments? So we can kind of get into not only maybe how to unwind it, but how do we make this work and how will it work from day one?
Interesting. That's interesting. You bring that up. It brings up a situation I had where two families purchased a summer home together, and they purchased it together. And then later, one of them wanted to get out of the summer home, and they needed to go buy a primary residence. And as a lender, I got to look who was making the mortgage payment was important at the time.
Right.
In the future. At the time, it didn't matter because they would just all give this one guy that turned out to be my client in the future all the money, and he would write the check out of his checking account. Well, that turned out to be really hurting him because he wanted to buy another home without selling this summer home first because the people were still in it, and they didn't have time to go through this whole agreement thing. So I was hitting him with the entire mortgage payment on their departure, whereas he could not purchase another home. He had this huge mortgage payment on the books. So with an agreement in place where they were splitting the cost together, maybe paying half of it out of their checking account, maybe would have made things easier.
Right. And those are things to consider, right? How will these payments impact our future?
Yep.
I didn't even think of that. So that's a phenomenal point that you brought up, that if we just do it for convenience, I'll pay you and you pay the mortgage, and that becomes the history, then that might affect me when I apply for another loan someday. So great thing to think about.
Yeah.
The other thing we might cover is documenting how much of a down payment each side put in, right? Because, maybe I've got a little bit more money. I put in 20 grand. The other person puts in 10.
Yep.
And then 3 years, 5 years later, Do we remember what we did? Can we document what we did? How did we agree that was going to get handled if we sold the property? You know, with property comes responsibility, comes upkeep, right?
Yep.
So within the agreement, we might discuss how are we going to decide on improvements, repairs, who's going to pay for them,
Yep.
how are those going to get reconciled if and when we sell the property.
Okay.
So we can talk about those things in the agreement as well.